When the light faded from the sky and the shadows bloomed, the real villains woke to walk the darkness. Those that chased a so-called calling that was larger than the rubble's small-time disruptions and cash grabs. They didn't dream, they envisioned a world that only they could imagine. The bigger picture, the greater good, all just words to justify themselves and the lives they steal to prove their point. If you analyze the way of the world, peek through a magnifying glass to judge the actions of heroes, you might find that they do the same. That's what you'd become, a hero, conflicted and confused, but determined to pursue your own greater good, to save people because you'd been too slow to save your best friend. You sighed tiredly, sitting on the rooftop and overlooking the streets. It seemed a quiet night, too peaceful for the other shoe not to drop. And drop it did. Your comms buzzed just when you'd relaxed into your position, and you chided yourself for getting too comfortable. An underground hero was in pursuit of an upcoming villain making waves. You assure the dispatcher that you're on your way, and reluctantly take off. You track the hero's pager, leading you down a deserted street. From the roof, you take in the situation. The distressed hero on the ground, injured but breathing, and the villain in a long black coat, walking backwards into a swirling warp. You leap off the building, catching the villain by surprise. You grab onto his tattered coat. Where do you think you're going? You still, stunned by the sapphires in the villain's eyes. They were breathtaking, beautiful, and painfully familiar. You considered yourself crazy for pausing, crazy for assuming and not defeating the villain where he stood. This villain could not be who you thought. Not with his burned and bruised purple patchwork of skin, not with his unrecognizable stitched face. You had booked yourself in for a psychological evaluation the instant you went back to the agency. If it was not for the way the villain's eyes widened with recognition. You release him, impulsively, stepping back in your numb, astounded state. You breath the unbelievable, the impossible. Touya. The villain's minimal movement relaxed. His lips quirked up in a smirk, before he passively stepped back into the warp, disappearing in the next second, like the ghost he was. You stood there staring at the desolate air for longer than you should, before the injured hero's pained shout had woken you from your trance. You were lucky that that hero had been so clouded with pains from his burns that he hadn't noticed you basically allow a villain to escape. There would be countless, never-ending questions to atone for your actions, and you wouldn't have had the time to return to the scene that evening. The streets were just as deserted as they were in the early parts of the morning, when the incident had occurred. You knew that returning to the crime scene was not the smartest idea. What villain would return to the place they'd nearly been caught? Yet, you couldn't fight the urge, the need to know that you weren't seeing things. You've grown stupid, Firefly. You suck in a breath at the deep, raspy voice behind you. You whip around, searching the darkness, almost convinced you were hearing things now as well, before you narrowed your eyes at the silhouette hidden just outside the circle of light cast down by the street lamp. It is you, you say in awe. And if it wasn't, you just sought out some villain scum on the chance? He mocked. Years of guilt compounded in your heart, displaced by his appearance, by his existence. Where did you place all that feeling, now that the base crumbled? You step into the circle of light, towards the hooded silhouette that stood concealed by shadows. You sought out a hero, you say. I could have arrested you. He snorted, like you could. The currents of your conflicted emotions fought against your attempts to rein it in, and you became overwhelmed by the need to see him. Your friend that you'd spent all this time believing was dead. You reach out into the darkness, calling for him. Touya! But he flinched back, and reluctantly, your hand falls. I'll be at the docks. tomorrow night, on the 4th pier," he said offhandedly, turning on his heel. "You can't stay longer?" you all but beg, desperate to have your hundreds of questions answered. "It's too open here. Might run into trouble like yourself," he teased impassively. He wasn't wrong. Anyone walking home could see them. It would be suspicious for a hero and a villain to be seen together. One would think that they were conspiring. "You agree. Okay, I'll be there, Touya. It's Dabi now," he states quietly. "You will always be Touya to me," you say imploringly. "Always my friend." Though you could not see Touya, you sensed his stare in the prolonged moment. He hummed, non-committal, and then evaporated into shadows. The wind by the sea whooped through your hair, making you grateful for your jacket's protection from it. You mindlessly swing your legs over the dark waves, beating below the pier. It must be high tide, considering how close the water was to your feet. The docks curved to show a portion of the city. As you sat in darkness, you got to witness the hidden gem beyond. The buildings that towered across the bay glimmered like a kaleidoscope, an array of lights combining to create a crystal city, though you knew it was just glass, distance, and perspective that birthed the beauty before you. Who would have thought people in logistics had the best view? "How long have you been sitting here?" You straighten at the voice of the newcomer. In the assorted light lent to the docks, you were reminded of how much he changed. How had life turned your childhood friend, someone who embodied being a hero, into a villain? You wanted to know. "Long enough for my ass to get cold on the cement," you tell Touya. He plops down, reclining with his 2 arms behind him. "Guess it's my turn." The silence that follows is awkward. They weren't kids anymore, and could no longer take comfort in each other's presence. They were a ruler's length apart, on the pier, but years of unknowns crammed into that space, leaving you at a loss as to what to begin with. To your surprise, Touya spoke first. "I thought you'd bring your whole hero team to come get me," he said, as he pulled a cigarette from his coat pocket and clicked a flame onto his fingers to light it. You glanced at him to see if he was serious. It was a lot more difficult to gauge his emotions now, compared to Kid Touya, who yelled when he was angry and smiled when he succeeded. This Touya held nothing on his face, apart from the graveyard of his other emotions: joy, sadness, frustration. His features held firm to project one thing: disinterest. You'd imagined countless times what Touya would look like had he grown up, but the reality of him drifted far from the image in your mind. "What would I have told them?" you questioned sarcastically. "I think the villain we fought is my best friend who died years ago?" They would have thrown me into a psych ward, and well, I half thought I imagined you anyway. "You'd imagine me like this?" he asks, bemused. You shrug. "Well, I didn't know how else to explain it," you defend. "You've been... Where have you been?" you demand suddenly, forcing yourself to look at Touya and ensure he could see the hurt in your eyes. "All these years, why did you never come back? Why did you never come see me? Did you think I'd rat you out to your dad or what? Didn't you trust me?" Touya took a long, infuriating drag of his cigarette. "Technically, I died in a horrible forest fire. It was tragic," he said impassively, like describing a flower he'd picked off the ground. You deflate at his answer, slumping and crossing your arms. "I remember, Touya. I was there." His apparently not dead day haunted you, had woken you in cold sweats with nightmares, had even made you fail your fire rescue practice exam. How could you not remember it? "At least that makes one of you," he says quietly. as nonchalantly as he'd said everything else, but you imagined that beyond his tone was animosity for his father abandoning him that day. You sigh tiredly, the whiplash from your rush of emotions exhausting you. Why did you meet me here, if it was a risk to you? Touya shrugged. Why did you? And the burns? They were never that bad. Is that part of your quirk? A part of dying, Firefly, he said softly. So you did die, you state, swallowing the uncomfortable lump in your throat. Then how did you come back? Touya glances over. Long story. Does it matter? Yes! You shout incredulously, frustrated by his vague answers. Yes, it matters. I thought you were dead. I blamed myself. Why the fuck would you blame yourself? He said, without even looking at you. You didn't set the forest on fire. I did. You didn't even think to see me, you say disheartened. All this time you tortured yourself over his memory, and he'd been alive and letting you. There was a lot going on. It wasn't personal. Your anger bubbles over, and you yell. It was fucking personal. You punch his arm hard, and instantly regret it. Oh shit, sorry, that must have hurt with the burns. I didn't mean... You're cut off by Touya's laugh. Low, but genuine. The first emotive action he'd done since he'd arrived there. And you're stunned. From the corner of his mouth, where the purple skin connected to the fair, blood bloomed and trickled down his chin. Touya slipped a thumb over it, stubbing out the red rivulet. It doesn't hurt, Firefly. No need to be dramatic. His smile fades soon, and your anger and worry go with it. You relax into the moment, into the peculiarity of the situation you were in right now. You huff. You're just as mean as you were when you were younger. And yet, you were still my friend, he says. I still am your friend, you correct? Touya shoots you a side eye. That's not going to work, Firefly. Saying we're friends doesn't change the fact that my kind hurt and kill yours, and that you should be dragging me to jail right now. Do you want to go? I hear the food's getting better. You joke calmly. Touya is unimpressed. I'm being serious. You smile, slyly. We can't be two strangers that happen to share a spot on the pier? Say that when we get caught and see if the alibi works. You consider your next move. Wonder if you turn your back on Touya right now, would he apparate before you had a chance to turn back? That was a risk you had to take. He'd been gone for most of your life. Would the rest be that big of a deal? You rise off the ground and shove your hands into your jacket pockets. Well, if you're scared to get caught, Touya, don't come back. Guess you grew up to be a scaredy cat. Touya's eyes narrow. Scaredy cat? Are you 5? You grin and begin to walk away. I'll be back here next week, you throw into the air, just as carelessly and casually as Touya had done initially. No obligation for commitment, and no guarantee he'd be there. Yet somehow you knew he would, whether by the hope in your heart or the burning stare at your back.